On this episode of Doing the Most, we're making Jack Keller's recipe for lavender wine.
Homemade brews and various how-tos, everything from meat to roast, bake creation, fermentation, inebriation, doing the most.
You may have tuned in recently to our 2022 redux of the Great Mead Project, where one of the mystery ingredients was lavender. And it turns out a lot of folks don't like brewing with lavender. And that makes sense because it's a bit of a polarizing ingredient. Lavender is a strong flavor and aromatic, and a lot of people think it smells like soap. And, we've got a recipe actually for a lavender soda syrup on the channel. Check out the video on that. We do several soda syrups in that video, and it's really delicious. It's floral, it's delicate, it's sweet. It works perfectly with carbonated water. And so lavender can be a thing that can be enjoyed if you're open to it. And this is a recipe that is very lavender forward. There's a little bit of grape juice concentrate in there too to bring in some of that wininess, but it is lavender heavy. And so this is part of our series on Jack Keller wines. We're making 12 Jack Keller wines with the support of Homebrew Ohio. Big thanks to Homebrew Ohio for providing some of the gear and equipment for this series, enabling us to explore the Jack Keller wines from his book, Home Winemaking. If you'd like to pick up a copy of that book, there's a link in the description where you can grab a copy of it. It's just like the Bible of country fruit winemaking. If you're into country fruit wines, you need this book. Jack Keller was a genius. And Jack liked to ferment all the things, from flowers to roots to fruits and vegetables, things you would find on your salad. Jack probably made a wine out of it, and so this should be a trusted recipe, right? For lavender wine, for wine made from flower petals. So let's check it out. First up, here are the ingredients. The ingredients for this lavender wine are 1 to 1.5 pints of packed lavender flowers, 1 can of 100% white grape juice, 1 3/4 pounds of fine granulated sugar, 2 teaspoons of citric acid, 1/4 teaspoon of grape tannin, and water up to 1 gallon. We'll also be using 1 teaspoon of yeast nutrient, 1/8 teaspoon of yeast energizer, and I didn't have Lalvin's DV10 yeast, couldn't find it anywhere, so I substituted it with what I felt was like the closest analogous yeast, which ended up being K1V1116. So as you can see, this is a pretty bare bones recipe. Some things to remember about Jack Keller fruit wine recipes: a lot of times, even though you start with a gallon or more, you end up having less than a gallon when you transfer to secondary. So keeping that in mind, either transfer to a smaller than 1 gallon vessel or scale up by 25-30%, so that way you have a little bit more when you're going into secondary so you can fill a gallon vessel. Another thing, we're tasting all of Jack's country fruit wines dry. That means no back sweetening, no added sugar. So this is going to be a dry lavender wine that we'll be tasting at the end. Enough yammering, here's how it's made. We're going to start by putting all of those lavender petals into a muslin straining bag, so that way when it's time to remove them later, we can do that with no fuss, leaving no petals behind. So all that goes into the bag, and then you'll just put a nice tight knot on the top of that. We're going to start heating up some water, and we're just going to get that to kind of a simmer, hot enough that we can dissolve some sugar in it. Lavender petals go in, and then our white grape juice concentrate goes in. And at this time, there were some supply chain issues trying to get white grape juice concentrate in the cans in the grocery stores, so I just made my own by reducing some white grape juice down very gently to about 1/3 of its original volume. So I am pouring in my homemade white grape juice concentrate here, just to try and stay loyal to the original recipe. And once that starts steaming and bubbling, we'll remove that from the heat, and we'll be adding in our sugar. So just pour that sugar right in, and you're gonna stir, stir, stir to get it dissolved. And then we'll be pouring that directly on top of the lavender petals. This is a nice step to help sanitize them a little bit and make sure we make a nice tea out of that. Then we'll add in all of our little cups of ingredients. First is our acid, then our yeast energizer, then our yeast nutrient, and our tannin powder. Stir those up to make sure they're well blended, and then we'll top that off with some icy cold water to help bring the temperature back down. We'll pitch our yeast the next morning after this has come closer down to room temperature. Always make sure you notate what's in the bucket and when you started, and we'll be back the next morning. So the next morning we're pitching our K1V1116. That's going to go in dry, the whole packet just right on top of the ingredients in there. Give it a little shake to combine, and then we'll put that under an airlock. The airlock is a one-way water valve that helps keep the bad little buggies out and reduce our risk of getting an infection in our wine. A week later, we're going to remove those lavender petals just to get them out of there and allow this thing to finish fermentation. We don't want to leave them in too long, and Jack recommends 7 days. So with some gloved up, sanitized hands, we'll pull that bag out, squeeze as much out of there as we can, and then replace our lid and airlock and let that finish fermentation. Many weeks later, we get that racked off from primary to secondary, and we're going to put that in and cold crash it. You can see there about 3/4 of a gallon, so we want to get that cold crashed and clear as quick as we can, so that a couple weeks later we can go ahead and get that in bottles so we don't have too much of a risk of oxidization with all that headspace sitting on top of it. So as you can see, again, very, very simple process. Makes a pretty crystal clear wine pretty quickly. And so now what's left to do is give this a taste. I had some friends in town a few months back. We opened a bottle just for fun. Here's what one of them thought about this wine.
The lavender wine?
Lavender! The other professed to hating lavender before he even tried it and made lots of gagging noises after trying it. So let's see if a few more months of age do anything to help improve this lavender wine. As you can see, not much of that pinkish reddish color was retained. Ended up being kind of a white winey color, which a little bit makes sense. You know, color is going to fade after time. A lot of times that it's going to drop out even of suspension. And we had that grape juice concentrate in there that was a big, bold amber color. And so with some of the color dropping out as it cleared, the remaining color being from that grape juice concentrate, it makes sense that it would kind of almost look like a mead or, you know, a big bodied white wine in the glass. It is fairly leggy. It does smell soapy. It smells like a lavender scented like lotion or hand cream. It's got I think it's the alcohol that I'm just catching a slight hint of, gives it a bit of a medicinal kind of smell. It has retained the aromatic character of the flower really well though. If you just kind of know what lavender smells like and someone offered you this to smell, you would know this is lavender. You wouldn't be guessing any any other flower. That is powerful. All right. Again, I like lavender, so I'm not exceptionally hesitant about trying this, but I do have a little bit of pause. All right, let's do it. it is a bit medicinal. Like, you know those like homeopathic cough syrups that you can get that aren't really made with any medicine, but they've got like a bunch of herbs and flower extracts and things. It kind of tastes like something like that, like something that you would use to try and like alleviate a cough when nothing else is working. Oh, this one finished just under 1.0, so it finished fairly dry. There is potentially from the flowers like a sense of sweetness. You feel like it's sweet, or like it should be sweet. There's like an indication of sweetness in there. And there's a viscosity that really lingers, a wininess, I guess you would call it, that helps hold it onto the palate. Once you get past those first couple of sips, the lavender is kind of present as a secondary character to the wine flavors. The lavender's much more present in the nose, but the way it plays with that white grape wininess, and also being dry and relatively aged at this point. This is over a year old, so it's fairly smooth. It drinks a little bit like medicine. It's not offensive, but it's also not something where I'm gonna like take this bottle back to the living room after shooting this and like polish it off. I would say this is probably not a drink for everyone, but I think this is a well executed version of a lavender forward wine, if that's something that you're into. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please hit like below, maybe subscribe if you haven't already, and check out the playlist of all the other Jack Keller wines that we've made from Jack's book. And again, I'd encourage you to pick up a copy of his book, Home Winemaking, so that way you have access to all these amazing recipes. They're all a great starting off, like jumping off point for recipe development for yourself too, where you can read through Jack's notes and get an idea of why he does what he does and use that information to inform your own recipe making, whether it's for wine or mead or adjuncts that you're going to add to a beer. Great book. Really, really handy guide. Explore your creativity. Go into undiscovered country like Lavender Wine and, you know, see what works, see what doesn't. That's kind of the fun of fermentation, right? So, happy brewing, happy winemaking, and cheers.